This is my true story. I raised my daughter alone after my husband died. I thought she would care for me when I grew old, but love changes when greed enters the heart. Every morning, I walked my grandson to school. He was my only peace, my only reason to smile. One day, after his mother drove away, he held my hand and whispered, "Grandma, don't go home yet." I didn't understand then, but that moment saved my life. What I saw later broke me forever. Before I tell you everything, please tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now, and please subscribe so my story can reach more people. Every morning started the same. I woke up before the sun, made tea, and quietly folded my blanket. The house was always silent at that hour. My daughter rushed around getting ready for work, barely looking at me. I packed my grandson's lunch, tied his shoelaces, and walked him to school. Those walks were the best part of my day. He held my hand tightly, told me about his dreams, and asked endless questions. When we reached the gate, he waved and smiled. It made my heart feel warm, like maybe love still lived somewhere close by. After dropping him off, I always went back home to clean the kitchen, wash clothes, and cook lunch. My daughter often said she was too busy to help, so I tried to do everything. I didn't mind. It made me feel useful. The house stayed tidy, meals were ready, and I thought that was enough to keep peace. When she came home, she ate quietly, scrolled on her phone, and went to bed early. I didn't expect conversation anymore. I told myself she was just tired, that one day she would talk again like she used to when she was little. Our routine never changed. Weekdays were silent. Weekends were shorter versions of the same silence. My grandson was the only one who spoke to me with kindness. He asked if I was happy. I always told him yes, even though the answer was no. I didn't want him to worry. He was too young to understand loneliness. I told myself that taking care of them was still worth it, even if no one said thank you. I had raised my daughter with love. I could survive without hearing it back. Sometimes I sat in the small garden after finishing chores. I watched birds land on the fence and thought about the past. My husband used to say a home without warmth is just a roof. Back then, I didn't understand. Now, sitting alone under that same roof, I knew what he meant. But I kept pretending everything was fine. Pretending was easier than fighting. I convinced myself that my daughter's silence wasn't hate, only stress. That lie helped me sleep at night. Every morning she left in a hurry, saying the same words. "Don't forget to lock the door." Then she'd disappear into her car. I would wave goodbye to my grandson, walk back, and sit by the window, watching the road until their car was gone. Then the house felt big again, empty. I cleaned every room just to fill the quiet. By noon I made tea and waited for the day to end. The clock moved slow in that house. I didn't go out much. My daughter didn't like visitors. She said people talked too much. I didn't argue. I only had one friend, the vegetable seller down the road. He always asked why I looked tired. I smiled and said, "Old bones." He didn't press further. He gave me a few extra tomatoes sometimes, maybe because he saw the truth I tried to hide. I took them home, cooked quietly, and hoped my daughter would enjoy the meal. She never said if she did. At night, I tucked my grandson into bed. He liked stories, so I told him small ones from my childhood. He always listened, wide-eyed, until he fell asleep. I kissed his forehead, turned off the light, and sat beside him for a few minutes. He reminded me of the love I once had, the kind that didn't need words. I thought maybe he would grow up and remember me kindly. That was enough for me. Then I went to my room, locked the door, and sat on my bed. I listened to the faint sound of the television from my daughter's room. She never invited me to watch with her anymore. I stopped asking long ago. Instead, I held my husband's photo in my hand and whispered about my day. I told him our daughter was fine, that our grandson was growing fast. I didn't tell him how much it hurt to live like a stranger in my own home. I just said I was okay, because that's what I had learned to say. And so, the days passed like that. Quiet mornings, long afternoons, and lonely nights. I didn't know that behind this routine, danger was waiting. I didn't know that one small whisper from a child would soon tear open all the lies I told myself. I thought my days were dull, but safe. I was wrong. Very wrong. Over time, I began to notice the change in my daughter. It was slow at first, almost invisible, like the way seasons shift before you realize summer is gone. She stopped sitting with me for morning tea. She stopped asking if I needed anything. She stopped calling me Ma. It became just her. When people asked about me, she said, "She's fine," like I was a neighbor, not her mother. I told myself she was busy, that work was heavy, that she would come back to me when things calmed down. But days turned to months, and nothing changed. I tried to talk to her a few times. I told her I could help, that I didn't mind doing more around the house. She said she didn't need help. Her tone was short, clipped, cold. It stung, but I smiled anyway. I had learned that silence kept peace longer than words. So I stayed quiet. I cooked her meals, folded her clothes, cleaned the floor, hoping she would notice. She never did. She came home, ate without a word, went to her room, and closed the door. The sound of that door locking each night became the sound of my place in her life. Closed off, unwanted, forgotten. Sometimes when she wasn't home, I walked into her room and looked around. Everything was perfect, neat, modern. The shelves were full of books I had never seen before. On her desk were papers, bills, files, things I didn't understand. But what caught my eye every time was the small safe under her bed. She kept it locked, always. I didn't know what was inside, but the way she guarded it made me uneasy. I didn't say anything, though. I had no right to question her. That's what I told myself, even when something inside me whispered otherwise. My grandson was the only one who noticed the distance. He asked me once why his mother didn't smile anymore. I didn't have an answer. I told him grown-ups get tired sometimes. He said, "But you're a grown-up too, Grandma, and you smile." That made me want to cry. I smiled anyway and told him that's what grandmas do. They smile so children don't worry. He hugged me tight, and I knew he was the only person left who still saw me as more than a shadow in the house. When I cooked dinner, I noticed my daughter sometimes didn't eat what I made. She would order food from outside or just drink something from a thermos. Once I asked if she didn't like my cooking anymore. She didn't answer. She looked at me for a moment, not angry, not sad, just blank, then walked away. That blank look scared me more than shouting ever could. It felt like she had erased me from her heart. She also stopped giving me money for small things. I didn't ask often, but when I did, she said she didn't have cash. I started selling small crochet pieces to a woman at the market for pocket money. I didn't tell my daughter. It made me feel embarrassed that I needed to do that, but I didn't want to depend on someone who looked at me like a burden. I began to eat alone most nights. My grandson sometimes joined me secretly before bed. He would sneak in with his little plate and sit cross-legged on the floor. We ate in silence, whispering small jokes. He always made me laugh, and for those few minutes the house felt alive again. But when we heard her footsteps in the hallway, he would rush out quickly, afraid of being caught. That fear broke my heart. A child shouldn't have to hide love. As weeks passed, I started to feel uneasy in my own home. I noticed how carefully she watched me sometimes, as if she was waiting for something. I ignored it, pretending everything was fine, but deep down, I felt it. Something was wrong. I didn't know what, but I could sense it in her eyes, in her silence, in the way she lingered at the kitchen door while I cooked. My instincts whispered that danger was nearby, but I pushed the thought away. I was her mother. A mother doesn't suspect her child. I went to sleep that night thinking about the distance between us. I told myself it was my fault. Maybe I had failed her somehow. Maybe she was just tired of taking care of an old woman. I cried quietly so no one could hear. My pillow was wet, but my heart was dry, emptied of hope. I didn't know that the same distance I blamed myself for would soon become the reason I was still alive. The morning that changed everything started like any other. I woke up early, cooked breakfast, and got my grandson ready for school. My daughter was rushing again, checking her phone, barely saying a word. I packed her lunch too, even though she rarely took it. I just wanted her to have something from my hands, something that reminded her she still had a mother who cared. When she left for work, I took my grandson's hand, and we began our walk like always. The road was quiet, the air cool. He walked slower that day, holding me tighter than usual. He didn't talk much on the way. Normally, he asked questions or told me what he dreamed about, but that morning he was quiet. I asked if he was tired, and he just nodded. When we reached the school gate, I bent down to fix his collar. That's when he leaned close and whispered, "Grandma, don't go home yet." His voice was soft, trembling a little. I looked at his face. His eyes were serious, scared even. Before I could ask what he meant, the bell rang, and he ran off through the gate. I stood there for a moment, frozen, watching him disappear into the crowd. I didn't understand what he meant. Why shouldn't I go home? Something in his tone made my stomach twist. I turned and started walking back, but my feet felt heavy. I stopped halfway, near the bus stop, and sat on the bench. The traffic moved slowly in front of me, and my mind kept replaying his words. I thought maybe he was just playing. Maybe he had overheard something and misunderstood. But the fear in his eyes, that wasn't play. It was real. I waited there for a long time, pretending to read the newspaper I bought from the vendor. My hands shook slightly as I turned the pages. I couldn't focus on the words. I watched people walk by, parents, children, workers, all busy with their mornings. The world around me looked normal, but I felt a strange stillness inside, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. I told myself I was being foolish, that there was no reason to worry. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I looked at my watch. It was almost 10. By then, my daughter should have been at work already. The thought gave me a little comfort. I told myself it was safe to go home now. Still, I hesitated. My grandson's voice echoed in my head. "Don't go home yet." I stood up, walked a few steps toward our street, and then stopped again. What harm could there be in waiting just a little longer? So I sat back down. I waited another half hour, watching the buses go by, the sun rising higher. An hour passed. I finally decided I was being silly. I stood, brushed off my sari, and started walking home. The closer I got, the heavier my heart felt. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful. When I turned the corner and saw my house at the end of the lane, I noticed something that made me stop. My daughter's car was parked outside. I blinked, thinking maybe I was mistaken. But no, it was definitely her car. I recognized the small scratch on the back door. My chest tightened. She was supposed to be at work. Why was she back home? I stepped behind a wall and watched for a moment. The car door opened and my daughter got out. My heart lifted for a second, thinking maybe she had just forgotten something. But then another door opened. A man stepped out from the passenger side. He wasn't her husband. He looked unfamiliar, tall, wearing dark clothes, carrying something heavy in a bag. I froze where I stood, half hidden behind the corner. My hands went cold. My mind raced, but my body wouldn't move. They both walked to the house like they belonged there. I stayed quiet, crouched low, watching. My daughter looked around once before unlocking the door. They went inside together. The curtains were drawn shut within seconds. That small act, closing the curtains, filled me with a fear I can't explain. I had lived with my daughter all these years, and I had never seen her do that during the day. My legs felt weak. I gripped the wall to steady myself. Suddenly, I remembered what my grandson had said again, and my heart started pounding. He had known something. That tiny voice, that small warning. It wasn't random. It was real. And now, I was afraid to even breathe. I stayed there for several minutes, staring at the quiet house. Something inside told me not to move, not to go closer. But curiosity and fear are strange things. They push you even when you want to run. So I decided I would wait just a little longer, hidden, watching, praying that my grandson had been wrong. I stayed near the corner for a long time, hidden behind the wall. My legs hurt from standing, but fear kept me still. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe I wanted proof that nothing was wrong, that my grandson's whisper had been just worry. But deep down, I already knew that something bad was happening inside that house. The same house where I had cooked, prayed, and loved for years now felt like a trap I had almost walked into. The thought made my chest tighten. I sat on the small stone near the gate and tried to breathe slowly. The road was quiet that morning. Only a few people passed by, carrying bags or talking on their phones. No one looked at me twice. I looked like just another old woman resting in the shade, but inside, I was trembling. My eyes stayed fixed on the gate. My daughter's car was still there. The curtains stayed closed. I didn't hear any sound from inside. No talking, no music, nothing. That silence was worse than noise. It felt like the house itself was holding its breath. I wondered what they were doing. Minutes turned into an hour. The sun rose higher, and the air grew warmer. I wiped sweat from my face with the end of my sari. My thoughts ran wild. What if my grandson had heard something? What if my daughter was hiding something dangerous? The questions wouldn't stop. I wanted to walk away, but my feet wouldn't move. Something inside told me to wait. So, I waited. I told myself I would go home after 10 more minutes. Then 10 more passed, and I stayed again. I tried to distract myself. I opened my small purse and looked through it. An old photo of my husband, some coins, a handkerchief. That photo gave me courage. He had always told me to trust my instincts. I looked at his face in the picture and whispered, "Something is wrong." The words came out shaky, but saying them made me feel a little stronger. I looked back at the house. The car was still there, the curtains still drawn. My daughter's behavior over the past months flashed through my mind, her cold tone, her distant eyes, her locked safe. It all started to make sense now, and I didn't like where my thoughts were going. 2 hours had passed. I decided to walk slowly toward the house. My steps were careful, quiet. I stopped at the neighbor's gate and peeked between the bushes. From there, I could see the back of my house clearly. The kitchen window was half open. I saw movement, a shadow crossing the floor. Then another. My heart jumped. I crouched lower, pressing my back against the wall. I couldn't see their faces, but I could tell they were both inside. I saw my daughter's hand pull the curtain back for a second, then close it again. I ducked quickly, afraid she might see me. I waited again. The minutes felt heavy. Every sound made me flinch. A bird landing on the fence, a dog barking, a car honking far away. I thought about my grandson at school, how small he was, how brave he had been to warn me. He must have seen something before, something that scared him enough to whisper those words. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. My hands gripped the edge of the wall. I told myself I had to see what was happening. I moved closer, slowly, my body shaking from fear and age. The closer I got, the stronger the smell from the kitchen became, something sharp, chemical, not food. I knew that smell didn't belong in a home. My hands began to sweat. I crouched beside the window, just low enough to see through the small gap. I could hear faint voices, low but clear enough to tell they were serious. I couldn't catch every word, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't good. I pulled back and sat on the ground, hiding behind the bushes again. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling someone, but my phone was old, and I didn't have many numbers saved. I didn't want to make a mistake. I decided to wait a little longer just to be sure. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. The waiting felt endless. Each second stretched like an hour, but I knew I couldn't leave yet, not until I knew the truth. I stayed there until the sun began to move west. My legs ached, but I didn't move. The gate stayed closed, the car unmoved. The house looked calm, but I could feel the danger inside it. I thought of my grandson again, how he had looked at me that morning, scared, but trying to be brave. That was enough to keep me sitting there. I didn't know what I was about to find, but I knew one thing. My little boy had saved me from something terrible, and I had to find out what it was. The air around the house felt heavy, thick with silence. I could hear my heart beat louder than the traffic down the road. I waited a little longer, then moved closer again, step by step, careful not to make a sound. The curtains were still closed, but the small gap near the kitchen window let in just enough light for me to see shadows moving inside. My breath caught when I saw my daughter again. She was not alone. The man stood beside her, holding the same dark bag I had seen earlier. He opened it on the floor and took something out, something wrapped tightly in a cloth. I couldn't see what it was, but I saw the way they both looked at it. Serious, focused. I knew then this was not a casual visit. I crouched lower, keeping my eyes on the window. My knees hurt, but I didn't care. My daughter pointed at something near the sink. The man nodded and walked over. I heard a faint clinking sound, like glass touching glass. My stomach twisted. He pulled out bottles from the bag and placed them on the counter. Small bottles, clear, filled with liquid. I saw her reach for one. She opened it and sniffed, then poured a little into a cup. My chest tightened. I recognized that cup. It was mine. The one with the blue flowers. The one I always used for tea. I froze where I was. The world around me seemed to stop moving. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She poured carefully, then stirred it with a spoon. I saw her mouth move. She was saying something to the man, but I couldn't hear the words clearly. The sound was muffled through the glass, but I caught a few. Enough. Tonight. Done. My blood ran cold. My hand went to my chest. I wanted to cry, to shout, to run, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like stone. The man nodded and took out 2 plates. He placed food on them from a small container. My daughter laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in years, but it wasn't warm. It was strange, sharp. She set 1 plate aside and put the cup next to it. On the side of the cup, I saw a small piece of tape. Written on it, in her handwriting, was 1 word. Mom. That word hit me harder than anything else. It was as if my heart stopped for a moment. I understood everything then. The cold meals, the distance, the strange looks. All of it made sense now. She hadn't been tired. She hadn't been angry. She had been planning. And I, foolish old woman, had trusted her completely. I covered my mouth with my hand, trying not to make a sound. Tears filled my eyes, but I blinked them back. I couldn't let her see me. I needed to be quiet, to think. I wanted to scream, to ask her why, but I knew if I did, I wouldn't live long enough to hear the answer. I crouched lower, hidden in the shadow of the wall, and watched her carefully place the plate and cup on the dining table, the same spot she always left my lunch. Then she walked to the door, looked around, and locked it from the inside. The man leaned against the wall and said something that made her smile. She looked proud, satisfied. They stood there for a while, talking softly. I couldn't hear their words, but I didn't need to. I already knew what this was. This was not my home anymore. It was a trap, and my own daughter had set it for me. My body trembled. I stepped back slowly, careful not to rustle the leaves. My knees shook so badly I thought I might fall. I wanted to run, but I forced myself to move quietly, 1 step at a time, until I reached the gate. The world felt unreal, like I was walking inside a nightmare. My mind replayed every kind thing I had ever done for her, feeding her, sewing her clothes, praying for her success. And now she wanted me gone, my daughter, my blood. When I reached the end of the street, I finally stopped and let myself breathe. My chest hurt, and my throat burned from holding back sobs. I looked up at the sky and whispered a prayer. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew one thing. I couldn't go back home. My grandson's small voice had saved me. He had seen something and tried to protect me the only way he knew how. I wiped my tears and whispered to myself, "You were right, my boy. You saved your grandma." I turned toward the main road. I knew where I needed to go. My legs were weak, but my mind was clear. I had seen enough to know the truth. It was time to tell someone who could stop it before it was too late. I walked far enough to see my house from a distance but not be seen. My legs were weak, but I couldn't stop watching. I needed to know more before I spoke to anyone. My heart told me to run straight to the police, but my mind told me to be sure. I stood behind a tree near the end of the road, peeking through the branches. The curtains stayed closed, but I could still see the faint shadows inside. I waited, hoping maybe I had misunderstood everything. But deep down, I knew the truth. What I had seen wasn't confusion. It was evil, quiet, and planned. I thought of all the small things that suddenly made sense. The day she had told me not to cook because she would handle lunch. The strange taste in my tea some mornings. The way she had started asking about my bank account and papers. At the time, I thought she was trying to help. But now I knew better. The memory made my skin crawl. My own daughter had been preparing for this, and I had been too blind to see it. From where I stood, I could hear faint noises coming from inside. There was movement, a dull thud, then a dragging sound. It sent a chill down my spine. I covered my mouth with my hand, afraid I might gasp out loud. I couldn't see clearly, but I imagined what they were doing, and every thought was worse than the last. My chest tightened. I whispered a prayer under my breath, begging God to keep my grandson safe. He was the reason I was still standing. Without his warning, I would have walked straight into that house and never walked out again. I decided to move closer again, just enough to see through the kitchen window. My body ached, but fear made me stronger. I crouched low, my heart pounding so hard I thought they would hear it. Through the small gap in the curtain, I saw the man wiping something off the floor. My daughter handed him a towel, calm, almost casual. They didn't look scared. They looked like people who had done this before. The way they moved together terrified me. I realized then this wasn't just a moment of madness. It was something planned, something rehearsed. My breath came out shaky. I leaned back against the wall, trying to stop my hands from trembling. I felt old and small, but I couldn't leave yet. I needed to remember everything. Every detail could matter later. I noticed the back door was slightly open, the same one I usually left unlocked when I went to drop my grandson at school. My stomach turned. If I had gone home as usual, I would have walked straight through that door, made my tea, and sat at that table. The thought made my knees weak. I closed my eyes for a moment and thanked my grandson again in silence. When I opened my eyes, I saw them standing near the table, talking again. My daughter pointed toward my bedroom door, saying something I couldn't hear. The man nodded and smiled. My blood went cold. They weren't just planning the tea. They were planning what came after. I could see it in their faces. They thought I was already as good as gone. I felt sick to my stomach. I wanted to scream, to shout for help, but I knew it would only make things worse. I had to be quiet. I had to be smart. I turned away from the window and walked quickly but carefully back to the main road. I didn't look back. My mind was spinning, my throat dry. Each step felt like walking through water. When I reached the corner, I stopped and leaned against a pole, breathing hard. My whole body shook. I took out my phone and looked at it. I didn't have my daughter's husband's number saved. She had kept me away from him too. But I knew the police station wasn't far. I had walked past it many times before. I straightened my back and told myself I would go there. I couldn't protect myself from what was inside that house, but I could tell someone who could. As I started walking again, I thought about my grandson sitting in class, unaware of what I had just seen. My heart ached for him. He didn't deserve this, to live with a mother who could do something so cruel. I promised myself that no matter what happened, I would make sure he stayed safe. I would tell the truth, every word, every detail. I would not stay silent anymore. I kept walking, one slow step after another. My body was trembling, but my mind was clear now. The fog of denial had lifted. I knew who she was. I knew what she had planned, and I knew I had to act fast before she realized I was still alive. As I walked toward the main road, everything around me blurred. Cars passed, people talked, but I couldn't hear any of it. My mind was full of pictures. My daughter's face, the cup with my name, the man's shadow, the sound of liquid pouring. Each image cut into me like a knife. I had spent my whole life protecting her, giving her everything I had, and she had turned that love into poison. The word kept echoing in my head. Poison. I couldn't even think it without feeling sick. I wanted to believe I had imagined it all, but I knew what I saw. I had looked at death in my own kitchen. I found a bench near a shop and sat down. My hands shook so badly I had to hold them together. I tried to breathe slowly, to think clearly. Why would she do it? Was it money? The house? My pension? I didn't have much, but maybe it wasn't about how much. Maybe it was just greed, the kind that eats everything good in a person. I thought about how distant she had been lately, how cold, how she looked through me like I was invisible. Maybe she had stopped seeing me as her mother long ago. Maybe now she only saw an obstacle. I wiped my eyes and looked around. The street was busy now. People buying vegetables, children in uniforms, shopkeepers shouting prices. Life went on, while my world had just broken apart. I felt so small sitting there. I didn't know where to go. I couldn't go home, and I didn't want to go to anyone I knew. I was ashamed. Ashamed that I had raised someone who could do something so cruel. I had told everyone how proud I was of my daughter. I had said she was strong, hardworking, kind, and now all those words felt like lies. After a few minutes, I realized I couldn't sit there forever. I stood up, steadying myself on the bench. I looked toward the direction of the police station. It was a long walk, but I knew the way. My heart was beating fast, but I forced myself to move. Every step felt like walking through mud. I kept seeing my grandson's face, his worried eyes that morning, his small voice whispering those words. That tiny act had saved me. I thought of how brave he was to warn me. He must have known what his mother was doing, even if he didn't understand it fully. Children see more than we think. When I reached the main crossing, I saw a familiar tea stall. The man there had known me for years. He waved and asked if I wanted tea. I nodded, though my throat was dry and my stomach hurt. I sat on the small wooden bench and held the cup in my hands. The smell of it almost made me cry. Tea had always been something warm, something safe. Now even that simple thing felt dangerous. I couldn't bring the cup to my lips. I stared at it until the steam disappeared. I knew then that I could never go back to that house. Even if the police came, even if my daughter was arrested, that place would never be home again. It was built on trust, and she had poisoned that too. I had nowhere to live, no plan, no money with me, but I still had something she didn't, the truth, and I would use it. I wouldn't let fear make me silent, not this time. As I sat there, an old memory came back. The day I gave birth to her. I remembered holding her tiny hand, promising I would protect her from the world. I never thought one day I would have to protect myself from her. That memory hurt more than anything else. It felt like my heart was breaking in slow motion. I closed my eyes and let the tears fall quietly. No one noticed, and that was a relief. I didn't want pity. I just wanted strength. I opened my eyes, took a deep breath, and stood up again. I had made my choice. I was going to the police. I would tell them everything. About the man, the bag, the bottles, the cup with my name. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I couldn't stay silent another minute. My husband used to say that silence can kill faster than poison. Now I understood what he meant. The sky had turned cloudy by the time I started walking again. The wind was strong, but it felt good against my face. I didn't feel weak anymore. I didn't feel old. I felt awake, alive, and determined. My daughter had tried to end me, but I was still here. Her plan had failed because of one small voice, a child's whisper that carried truth louder than any scream. That was when I realized something powerful. Evil can hide behind love, but love can also expose it. And that love had just saved my life. When I finally reached the police station, my legs felt like they would give out. The officer at the desk looked at me strangely. Maybe because I was trembling. Maybe because my face was pale. I tried to speak, but my throat wouldn't work. I took a deep breath and forced the words out one by one, explaining everything. The officer frowned, asked questions, wrote things down. I told him about the man, the bottles, the cup with my name on it. I told him about my grandson's warning, about the whisper that saved me. For the first time in my life, I was talking about my own child, as if she were a stranger who meant to harm me. The words hurt to say, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The officers listened carefully. One of them asked if I wanted to file a formal complaint. I nodded. My hands shook as I signed the paper. I had never imagined I would need protection from my own blood. After the paperwork, they said they would send a team to check the house. I gave them the address, my daughter's name, and the details of the man she was with. They told me to wait there. I sat on a wooden bench near the wall, staring at the clock, hearing every tick as if time had slowed down. My mind kept replaying the image of that cup on the table. My stomach twisted every time I thought of how close I had come to drinking it. An hour passed before an officer came back. He said a team had gone to the house and found someone inside. I couldn't breathe for a second. I asked who. He said both of them were there, my daughter and the man. They were questioned. The officers found bottles in the kitchen, just like I had described. My daughter had tried to say they were medicine, but the man had panicked. He said too much, gave away more than he meant to. My heart sank. It was real, all of it. There was no misunderstanding, no mistake. My own daughter had planned to end me. The shock hit me like a wave. I felt my chest tighten. I couldn't cry. There were no tears left. The truth was too big, too heavy to feel anything. I just sat there, empty, cold, staring at nothing. One of the officers brought me water. My hands trembled as I held the glass. I didn't drink it, not even from them. I couldn't trust anything anymore. The fear of what had almost happened was stronger than thirst. They asked if I had somewhere safe to go. I said no. I had no one now, except my grandson. They said they would contact social services to arrange a place for the night. I nodded. I didn't care where I stayed. I just wanted to close my eyes and stop thinking. But every time I blinked, I saw her face, my daughter, smiling while pouring poison into my cup. That smile would haunt me for the rest of my life. Later that evening, a woman from social services came. She spoke gently, like someone who had seen too many broken families before. She said my daughter had been taken in for questioning. The man had confessed everything, that they had planned to use my name to sell the house and claim my pension once I was gone. My stomach turned again. I had lived my life trying to raise her right, teaching her to value honesty, kindness, and family, and this was what she had learned: betrayal. I didn't know where I went wrong. The woman said they would take me to a small shelter for senior women that night. I agreed. It was quiet there, clean, safe. But sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the events of the day playing over and over in my mind. I thought of how close I had come to dying, quietly, inside my own home, without anyone knowing. I thought of how my grandson's tiny voice had been the only thing between me and death. That realization shook me to my core. Sometime after midnight, I finally sat up and cried. Not loud, not with anger, but softly, like my heart was leaking instead of breaking. I cried for my daughter, for the love that had turned to hate, for the home I had lost, for the trust that would never come back. But more than that, I cried with relief, because I was still alive, because love, even from one small boy, had been stronger than betrayal. When the morning came, I felt different, empty, but alive. I looked out the window and saw the sunrise. I whispered a quiet thank you to God, to fate, to my grandson. That little boy had saved my life. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never go back to that house again. It was not a home anymore. It was just a place where love had died and greed had tried to kill me too. The next morning I woke up before sunrise. I didn't know where I was for a moment. Then I remembered. The shelter, the police, everything that had happened. My heart started racing again. I sat up slowly, holding the blanket tight around me. The air was cold. I could hear other women moving quietly, whispering prayers, washing faces. It felt strange to be among strangers, but safer than I had felt in my own home. I didn't have much, just a small bag with my clothes and the papers the officer had given me. Still, I had something priceless, a second chance to live. A young woman from the shelter came and told me the police wanted to speak with me again. I followed her to the office. The officer there said they had confirmed everything. The poison had been tested. It was real. My daughter had confessed after being confronted with evidence. She had blamed the man, then tried to say it was a mistake, but it didn't matter. They both were under arrest. I listened in silence. My mind was blank. I didn't feel victory, only sadness. How could a mother ever win something like this? My child was in jail, and my heart was broken. When they asked if I wanted to press charges, I nodded. My voice was steady but quiet. I told them I didn't want revenge. I just wanted safety. For me, for my grandson. I wanted to make sure he would never grow up in a house full of lies. The officer said they would contact child services to check on him. I thanked them. For the first time in years, someone was helping me without expecting anything in return. That simple kindness felt heavier than gold. After the meeting, I went back to the small room they had given me. I sat by the window, watching the sun rise over the city. It looked peaceful, almost gentle. I thought about all the mornings I had wasted feeling small and unwanted in my daughter's house. Every breakfast eaten alone, every word swallowed to avoid anger. Every night I told myself she loved me deep down. I had fooled myself for so long. But now, I didn't have to pretend anymore. The truth had set me free, even though it hurt. Later that afternoon, my grandson came to visit. A social worker had brought him. When he saw me, he ran straight into my arms and cried. His small hands held onto my sari tightly. I held him close and stroked his hair. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. I could feel his fear, his guilt, his confusion. I whispered that everything would be okay, that none of it was his fault. He saved me, and I wanted him to know that. He looked up at me with red eyes, and I saw the same kindness his mother used to have before she lost it. It gave me strength. When the social worker said it was time to go, he didn't want to leave. I told him to be brave, to listen to the people taking care of him, and that I would see him again soon. He nodded, holding my hand until the very last second. Watching him walk away felt like losing a piece of my heart, but I knew this was necessary. He was safe now. That was all that mattered. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed everything that had happened, from the moment he whispered those words to me at the school gate, to the sight of my daughter pouring poison. It all felt like a dream I couldn't wake up from. But then I realized I had already woken up. I had survived it. I was free. The danger was gone. The fear that had followed me for months was finally over. I didn't know what the future would look like. I had no house, no family left, and no money to start over. But I had something more important, the will to keep living. I promised myself that I would build a new life, no matter how small or simple. I would never again depend on people who used love as a weapon. I would live quietly, honestly, and keep my heart open only to those who deserved it. When I finally closed my eyes, I whispered a small prayer of thanks for the officer who believed me, for the woman at the shelter who gave me warmth, and for the little boy who had saved his grandmother's life with 6 simple words. Love had nearly killed me, but love had also saved me, and that was the truth I would carry with me for the rest of my days. Days passed slowly after that. Each sunrise felt quieter, softer, as if the world itself was giving me time to heal. The shelter became my new home. The women there were kind. Some had stories worse than mine, some better, but all of us shared the same pain, being forgotten by the ones we loved most. We spoke in short sentences, never asking too many questions. I liked it that way. I had spent my life surrounded by noise. Now silence was a blessing. I started helping in the kitchen, folding laundry, watering the plants, little things that made me feel useful again. Sometimes I would sit near the window and watch the street below. Children ran to school, people hurried to work. Life went on. And every morning I thought of my grandson. I wondered if he was eating well, if he still missed me. The social worker said he was doing fine, staying with his father's relatives for now. That gave me peace. I didn't care where I lived anymore as long as he was safe. He had already done more for me than anyone ever had. He had saved my life. One afternoon, I was called to the office again. They said the case was closed. My daughter and that man had both confessed. The court had given them sentences. I didn't ask how long. I didn't want to know. No number of years could fix what she had broken. I signed some papers and thanked the officers. As I walked back to my room, I felt strangely calm. There was no anger left, only emptiness. But it was a quiet emptiness, one that didn't hurt as much anymore. That night, I took out the small photo I carried of my husband and placed it on the table. I lit a candle beside it. I spoke softly, telling him everything, about our daughter, our grandson, and how close I had come to joining him too soon. I told him that our little boy had been the one to protect me this time. I could almost feel my husband's presence, proud and sad at the same time. I cried quietly, but the tears were gentle now. They felt clean, not heavy. The days at the shelter became a rhythm I could live with. I learned to sleep without fear. I learned that safety isn't always in walls or family, but sometimes in the hearts of strangers who care. The women became my sisters in a way. We shared tea, stories, small laughter. I started teaching some of them how to read letters from their children. They called me Amma. It warmed something inside me that had been frozen for too long. One morning I received a letter. It was from my grandson. The handwriting was small, uneven. He said he missed me. He said he was doing well in school and that he hoped I was okay. He ended it with, "I love you, Grandma. You're my hero." My eyes filled with tears as I read it over and over. I folded it carefully and kept it inside my sari pocket. That little piece of paper was worth more than all the money or property I had ever owned. As months passed, I stopped counting the days. I found a strange kind of peace in the simplicity of my new life. I woke early, made tea, watered the plants, and helped wherever I could. No one shouted at me. No one told me I was a burden. People smiled when they saw me. That was enough. Sometimes I caught myself thinking of my daughter, not with anger, but with sadness. I wondered what had gone so wrong in her heart. But then I reminded myself that guilt and forgiveness take time. Maybe one day, when I'm gone, she will understand what she did. One evening I sat outside watching the sunset. The sky was orange and gold. I felt my grandson's letter in my pocket and smiled. Life had taken everything from me and then given me back something pure, truth, freedom, and love that asked for nothing in return. I wasn't rich, but I was alive. I wasn't surrounded by family, but I was surrounded by peace. That was enough for me. I whispered a quiet prayer before going inside. "Thank you," I said, "for letting me see the truth before it was too late." Then I looked up at the sky and added, "And thank you for that little boy, the one voice that saved my life."